Our guest this hour is acclaimed author, Charles Rosenay. You know, the last time he was on this program, we were talking about a different book, but he was saying that his friends were coming up to him and asking, when is the Beatles book coming out? When is the Beatles book coming out? Because this would be the guy, right, to write a Beatles book. Well, that day is finally here, because there is a Beatles book from Charles Rosenay, and it's a different kind of Beatles book. It's a collection of top 10 Beatles lists from celebrities, actors, athletes, mods, and rockers. Maybe even a few mockers in there. Who knows? Charles Rosenay, welcome to the show.
Great to be back. I never thought I'd do a Beatles book. I thought, every topic's been covered. What is there left to write about? And then after the success of the similar top 10 horror book, I thought, my gosh, there's got to be as many celebrities, if not more, that love Beatle topics that would give me a top 10 list. And thus, we've got the book of top 10 Beatle lists.
You know what's great about this book is that you know, as well as I do, Beatle fans, we're famous for doing this. We sit around and we come up with a multitude of lists, not just favorite Beatles songs, but it'll be, your favorite Beatle capital albums, your favorite Beatle bootlegs, your favorite Beatle concerts you've ever watched, your favorite Beatle films, your favorite Beatle documentaries. You're right. The possibilities are endless. So how did you go about approaching these people? Because there are some unusual folks that you wouldn't associate with being Beatles fans, but how did you go about compiling all these lists?
Well, first, as your prelude to the question, I love that you pointed out so many different topics, because I think if it was just your favorite top 10 Beatles songs, even with great reasons, even with anecdotes, it might not have been as fun as it is now, because we let the contributors really use whatever they wanted to. In the case of Elliot Easton of the Cars, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Elliot Easton, he came up with his favorite top 10 middle eights from songs, the bridges. And Paul McCartney's half-sister, Ruth McCartney, stepsister, whatever she is, came up with her favorite places in Liverpool that she remembered going to, locations. It was a lot of them went beyond the box and didn't just come up with favorite songs. But how did I come up with all these people? You wouldn't have thought that a lot of them, right? Run DMC, Darryl McDaniel, you didn't know he was a Beatles fan. For him to get a list, I think that's what's part of the magic of that book is, you've got your usual suspects. You've got people who, Cousin Brucey, a great legendary DJ, you would, you associate him with the Beatles. You would think he'd come up with a great list, and he does. Larry Kane, who toured with the Beatles and went to so many of their concerts in the U.S. for their U.S. concert tours. His list was top 10 favorite concerts he attended and the reasons why. I mean, my gosh, his list alone is like worth the price of the book. But then you got the people who you wouldn't have expected to come through, and I'm so proud of so many of them. I mean, Dick Cavett, one of the great TV personalities who got to interview George and got to interview John and Yoko. I thought it was a real coup getting him. And as I go through the book, it's the people, who would have thought that Charles Rosenay found Frank Ifield, who recorded on the same label as the Beatles on a VJ back in the day. And how did I find him? I have no idea how I, did that, detective work, found him, got a list from him. And I thought, wow, Beatle fans who are true diehards will love this. But that's not who the book is for. Between me and you, I know the Beatle fans and the diehards are going to love it because there's so much information and so much minutia and so much great, anecdotes that they've never read and we're going to love reading in one place. But it's the general person, the general fan, the casual fan who might love some of the songs but wants to see, Baseball Hall of Famer Dave Winfield's list. And it's as much a pop culture celebrity book as it is a Beatles book.
Well, I certainly hope that Frank Ifield's favorite Beatles album is Jolly What, the Beatles and Frank Ifield on stage. because that would just have to be. But you mentioned you've got these folks who you wouldn't associate with the Beatles, like Butch Patrick, for example.
Yeah.
Eddie Munster. What is Eddie Munster's favorite? Beatle this or Beatle that. You've got people like Mackenzie Phillips. Obviously, that's pop music genetic royalty. But even still, Tommy Chong, for example. And then,
Chong,
you've got some folks that are musicians that are names we're all going to know. But you actually have a couple of Beatles contributing.
2 Beatles.
Yes.
Shouldn't we just leave it so the listeners think that it's Paul and Ringo?
Well, one of them is a left-handed bassist.
That's right.
Yes.
The first left-handed bassist in the Beatles. Good job, Chaz Newby, still alive, still actually plays occasionally with the Quarrymen, and of course my friend Pete Best, who gave a great list, and his brother Rogue, who's also, part of that Best family royalty and is one of the curators of the Liverpool Beatles Museum that the Best family opened. So getting the two of them, they're friends, but that doesn't always mean you're going to get a list. That one took endless emails, and finally we were hanging out in Massachusetts. They were at a convention. I go, guys, I can't put out this book without you. If you're not in it, people are going to say, where was Pete Best? And so they both gave me great lists, which I'm really, really proud of. But, we mentioned Chaz Newby playing with the Quarrymen. There's 2 other Quarrymen in there. There's 4 different musicians connected, associated, or were members of Badfinger / the Ivies, which I'm really proud of. So again, the diehards will just eat this up.
Yeah, you've got people that are in the Beatles orbit, like the King of Pho himself. You've got Brute Force.
Yeah, great guy, very interesting, and he gave me a great list for the horror book. And, you would think, well, what does an Apple recording artist have to do with, horror? And back then, I was just over the top because I had 9 Beatle-related chapters, 9, Monkey-related chapters, and I thought, hey, my first horror book, my first book ever, I have enough music and rock and roll content that it'll satisfy, me, and it'll satisfy, the music people. But here, it's all music, and I guess the horror aspect sneaks in when I do have someone like Butch Patrick giving his list. Now, mind you, Butch is a huge Beatles fan, Monkees fan. He's a music guy, and it wasn't hard for him to come up with a top 10 list. Butch and I first met, believe it or not, in San Diego at a Beatles convention called Beatle Fair in San Diego.
Fantastic. You've also got people in here that you wouldn't expect, like Lisa Whelchel, who played Blair on The Facts of Life with her Beatles list.
And so I'm glad you mentioned Lisa. So how did I get Lisa's list? Believe it or not, she hosts a show on MeTV called Collector's Call, something like that. And they go to a different collector of a different whatever, once a month, a few times a year. They go to a horror collector, a guitar collector, a this collector, a that collector. And they went to a Monkees collector who happens to have a Monkees museum in Burlington, Connecticut. Well, they called on me to be the expert on the show. So I came in, looked at all the memorabilia, gave values for stuff. I was that guy. And I said, Lisa, I have a book coming out. I need a list from you. And so she can't say no, of course. And we got her, and you mentioned Mackenzie Phillips, from who's musical royalty, but also TV, and also Dinah Manoff, who is one of the stars of Soap, and also one of the stars of Grease. So got in a lot of cool actresses from movies and TV, too.
And, of course, we mentioned you do have a lot of folks who are in the orbit of the Beatles and Beatle royalty, in the sense you've got Bill Harry as well, who basically, when it comes to press about the Beatles, he's the guy.
Yeah. I'm very honored because the foreword was written by John Lennon's sister, Julia Baird, And Bill Harry gave me one, too. I said, I can't do two forwards. And I think someone would be insulted if I put a backward. So I put in the afterword by Bill Harry. And not only did he give me that afterword, and I'm so honored because, I mean, we're talking, Beatles royalty is right. He was there when it all began. He published Mersey Beat magazine. He was friends of the guys. You know, the Mersey Beat polls, the Beatles were at the top. He knew and it was, you know, him writing so much of the press for the guys in the day. And he gave me a list inside, and we're talking about talking it out of the box and thinking of things besides like Beatles songs or albums or movies. He did the top 10 Beatle gals who got away, the ones that, you know, didn't really wind up being Mrs. Paul or Mrs. John or Mrs. George or Mrs. Ringo, but were very important in the Beatles' lives through the years. And one of those people, Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, Bernie, a good friend, is one of the two people who opened a big exhibition in Liverpool called The Beatles Story. Her and her husband, Mike Byrne, who was a Mersey Beat musician, played in all the same clubs as the Beatles. They opened The Beatles Story. Also did a book on the Beatles story. She dated George Harrison. There's pictures of her at the Cavern watching the Beatles, and I got them to put in a list in the book. So a lot of, you know, 6 degrees of separation with the Beatle fans loving the Beatle inclusions in this top 10 list of books.
So out of all of them, and we don't want to give it away, but what would you consider to be perhaps the most unusual or some of the more unusual lists or topics?
That's a great question. Unusual might be the ones that I got and didn't expect. Tommy Chong, of course, from Cheech and Chong, you know, gave a drug-hazed, great interview to me, and I extrapolated his top 10 out of that. I loved his. Joey Mullen from Badfinger, no surprise, but his was mostly memories of, you know, playing with George, the concert from Bangladesh. Right. And those type of things jump out at me. But as a horror guy, and I hate to keep going back to that, but Ramsey Campbell, who's one of those famous authors of horror fiction from Liverpool, mind you, gave us a list. And he wasn't in the horror book, but he's in the Beatles book. So those three are pretty interesting. And I think I would be remiss if I don't mention the cover, because the artwork by Shannon, who's one of the world's greatest artists, it just really, really captures exactly what I wanted for the cover of the book, because I didn't want to use actual Beatle photos. I wanted to use artwork. I wanted to use artwork that looks like it's not even artwork, because her work is that amazing. But in my first book, the book of top 10 horror lists, I used 12 iconic shots of famous monsters in a frame, like a book frame. Right. And then with the graphics in the middle. So I wanted the Beatles book to emulate the same thing, and I said, can you come up with a series of 3 different shots of the Beatles, early years, pepper years, and latter years? And I'm just so proud of the cover. It's just so colorful and so captures, you know, the essence. I mean, you know, I'd like to think I put a lot of personality in my books. You know, I put in a lot of pictures of me with some of the stars and some of the celebrities, you know, hanging out with the Mark Hudsons of the world and all that. But I think the cover also captures that colorful, bright, you know, energy that I try to exude.
Hey, where can people go to get the book?
I'm doing tons of conventions, tons of libraries on the East Coast. The most obvious place is Amazon, where you can get it for the $19.99 and free shipping if you're a Prime member. Amazon everywhere. I think Amazon UK, Amazon all over the world. But if you know, your listeners want to get it from me directly and get a signed copy, they can just email book of top 10 Beatles lists, Beatles plural, and 10 the number, book of top 10 Beatles lists at gmail.com, and we'll hook them up. We'll send a signed copy immediately.
Now, you can't write a book like this and not be put on the spot yourself. So before we go, can you give me, counting down from number 3 to number 1, your top 3 Beatles songs, and we will go out on your number 1 Beatles song?
I do a Monkees show. I do a weekend Monkees interview show where I bring on a different guest every week. And we started off doing that with 3, and we play all 3. And now it's give me your favorite, and I play the favorite. And I usually will tell them up ahead to not put them on the spot like you just did. But it's the 3 in any which order, so you can pick the song you end with. The top 3 are currently "And Your Bird Can Sing." And it's so funny because I was on a radio show in Hartford, Connecticut, 30 years ago, I don't remember, and he says, okay, we're going to play a Beatles song. Give us one of your favorites, and don't give me like something obscure like "And Your Bird Can Sing." And I go, that's the one I was going to pick. And he didn't believe me because that's one of my favorites. And I remember it so fondly from the cartoons and all that. "And Your Bird Can Sing" is one. Number 2 has to be "Here, There, and Everywhere," which I think is one of the most ultimate, beautiful pop songs in the history of music, right up there with "Yesterday" and "Daydream Believer" and "God Only Knows," and I can go on and on. But "Here, There, and Everywhere" was one of my 2 wedding songs, so I got to go with that one. And number 3 or number 1, depending on how you look at it, which has grown from, just being an album track to being one of my all-time favorites. And I love when Beatle bands play it. I can't get enough of it. And it's "While My Guitar Gently Weeps."
All right. You know what? I guess that'll be the one we'll go out on then. Charles, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about the book of top 10 Beatles lists. And it's a collection of, it's 64 top 10 Beatles lists from celebrities, actors, athletes, mods, and rockers. Charles, you have a great rest of your day, sir.
Thank you so much. And the website is www.bookoftop10beatleslists.com. Thank you again. Bye-bye.